Welcome, everybody. We're going to start in about a minute. You can all hold down. Feel free to put your names in the chat so we can know who's here. Okay, Diana, do you want to put up the slides? So hi, everybody, and thanks for coming to this webinar, the second webinar that we've had for the Cultural Arts Awards. And this one is really specific to work samples and work samples that you all are going to be submitting, hopefully, as part of your application. So I hope it provides some useful information about this application. And in addition, I hope it also provides some useful information for your work moving forward. I know most of you, this won't be the only grant application you'll be doing. And I just feel like there are a lot of opportunities to submit work samples, whether you're independent artists who are looking to be part of an exhibition, or your arts organizations who are looking for sponsorships or grant opportunities. So good work samples are really important. They're key to your work. So a lot of the focus for this webinar is going to be about the types of work samples that we're looking for this application, but we also want to keep in mind and give you some pointers on good work samples that are important in general, and there may be some differences, and you'll see as we move along. So next slide. In the next hour, we're going to be talking about why we need work samples, the types of work samples that are requested for this application, and some ideas about what makes a good work sample and general things that you're going to want to avoid. And then, rather than listening to me speak for the entire workshop, we've got a couple of experts here who work in the media that we're going to be talking about, and they're going to have some pointers for you. So first, we're going to have Gioia Fonda, who's a Sacramento-based interdisciplinary artist working primarily in two-dimensional media, and she's a professor of two-dimensional studies at the Fine Arts Department at Sacramento City College. And we also have Dominick Porras, who's the founder of Domp Media and co-founder of Soul Collective and Soul Life Media. And he's an experienced videographer who's worked with artists, arts organizations, and documented a number of local events and shows in Sacramento. So I think they're going to have some really good information for you about your work samples. So next slide. Why do we ask for work samples? It should be the #1 question. And I thought it might be helpful for you to think of your work sample as a bridge between your application and your art form. So your CAA application that you're submitting is just pages and pages of text. You're going to be talking about who you are, the connections you're making, the art and the culture that you're sharing with the community, but it's only words, and words can't tell the whole story of art making or art presenting or community connection. They're less emotional often, and sometimes can be more easily overlooked or forgotten. So your goal is to make a connection, and the panel's going to want to know what's unique about you. So for example, if there were 3 organizations who were applying and all of whom identified as chamber ensembles, how would they differentiate? How would you differentiate yourself from the other organizations? And it's not about comparing yourself to the other organizations, but it's about what makes you stand out. So it could be the composition of your ensemble. It could be who makes up your organization, the venue that you perform in. Is it a large space, a small, intimate space? Is there something interesting or unique about that? Is it your repertoire that makes you stand out? Maybe it's your audience that really makes you stand out. And the work samples that you provide can help you get that point across. So if your work samples convey this information, it's really going to make you, it's going to show the panel how you're different than other organizations that might be applying. And it really should reflect how you view yourself. And I think that's the most important thing. Is it an accurate depiction of how you see yourself and your art form? So next slide. So the type of work samples, obviously, every different type of organization should really be thinking about a different type of work sample. So if you're a performing arts organization, you should really be thinking about using video. So because performance is movement, it's dialogue, it's spoken word, it's music, we need to see that come to life. In past cycles, we've had organizations, and it's particularly in the music genre, where someone maybe submitted only audio. And the reality is, when you only submit audio, something can really be lost for that. Unless your organization spends 100% of its time only doing recording, the panelists really need to see your work in action. Our grants panels are made up of experts in a number of different disciplines, but they're not all experts in one discipline. So just having a piece of audio wouldn't really satisfy the needs of everybody on the panel to sort of see the other aspects of your work. So we really want to know that performing arts organizations are submitting video. Visual arts organizations, so galleries, museums, maybe art service organizations to the visual arts, can definitely use slides or images. And the rule of thumb is usually about 10 representative images. And in the case of this grant, we should probably see a couple of your space, and Gioia will be able to talk about that a little bit later. So seeing the space maybe empty with nobody in it, but just being able to see the artwork in the space, and also some images of people interacting in that space. So they could be there for exhibitions, for talks, for art making events, things like that. You can also definitely include video if people are interacting and engaging with your space. So for example, if you use your space as a visual arts organization, but you also do performances, you might want to include a video as well as digital images to show the different uses of your space. And if you include people, we would suggest using something that's really active. Just showing maybe a static audience watching something is a little less impactful than watching people doing something that's more interactive. Literary arts organizations, spoken word, obviously video and images can work together there. So if you're an organization that produces books or poetry, something like that, you might want to include pages, samples of the artwork that's produced. But if you're doing anything that's performance-based as well, like readings or events, you would want to include the multiplicity of video and imagery. And for arts service organizations, it could be a little trickier. I mean, there are organizations out there providing really wonderful services to the community, but they don't necessarily do any kind of performance. Maybe the work that you do is lecture series, or maybe you do work that's more behind the scenes. But you really want to see ways that you can convey that organization in some kind of visual manner. So again, it could be photos and images of people at the organization attending something. It could be video if it's a really engaging lecture that you're doing. If you are forced to, if you're doing a big lecture series, and that's a really important thing you can do, you can use a flyer for that. You could send images of a flyer. That's not something that I recommend as your primary source of a work sample, but if your flyer is really wonderful and it's a poster or a flyer that really talks about the breadth of what you do, then I would say definitely think about using a flyer or a postcard or something like that. And again, if you're an arts education organization, please let us see some kind of interaction with the people that you're providing education for, whether it's youth or seniors or adults or whatever the population is. It's always really important to see who you're interacting with as an educational organization. So next slide. Work samples. So what do good work samples do? They certainly catch the panelist's eye and they enlighten them about what you're doing. Remember that a panel is going to look at between 50 and 100 applications, probably for this grant alone, and they're going to look at work samples for everyone. So you want to make sure that something that's going to make you memorable and what's going to hold their attention. You're going to want to show your work at its best. Is this the one thing that you're going to want them to remember you by? So think about the sample and really showing off your work in its best possible light, and also showing your high standards. So think of your work sample as an extension of your art practice. Is this something that you'd be proud of to represent your work on the stage or in your gallery? And would you show this to a potential major donor, or would you show it to a board member? If the answer is no to that question, really think about whether that really demonstrates the standards that you hold yourself to. In a work sample, drop us into the action. So you need to capture our attention quickly and hold it for up to 5 minutes. So make sure, particularly with video, that from the moment they turn it on and cue it up, something's happening. So there's no time to build momentum, and you want to lead with your best in this case. Make sure you relate your work sample to your application. So if you're talking about being an organization that's embedded in community work and you don't show yourself engaging with the community in your work samples, that might feel like a bit of a disconnect. And if you say your work is cutting edge, but you show in your work sample a very classical ballet, again, the panel's going to be a little bit confused about how you describe yourself and how you actually want to show yourself. Include a good description of your works in your work sample list. So make sure that it's easy for the panel to know what they're looking at and what they're seeing. So include the title, include the venue, include the date, and maybe a little description about what they're about to see and why it's important to your work, just so that they don't have to do a lot of figuring things out. You just want it to be really clear and concise, which doesn't mean a big paragraph. It's really just a couple of lines that describe what they're about to see. And if you're submitting a video, please make sure that the link works correctly. And you're also including a point for them to enter. So if you're sending them a link and you want them to start at 3 minutes and 30 seconds, that you make sure you describe it in the work sample link, that it's 3 minutes and 30 seconds. That's when they're going to begin. Because again, we're asking you to drop us into the middle of the work. And if you do different types of activities, show them. If you're a festival that does maybe one big event, but then you have a few other smaller satellite events, give us a little bit of an opportunity to see both of what you do so that they can see the breadth of your work and they can see the variety of your work. If you're a museum or a gallery who also does art making for kids, it's great to see maybe a gallery show and then see the art making activity that's happening as well. Again, so that the panelists can see, more than just one thing that you're doing. And again, you can do this either in a video sample that you want to put together, or maybe a video in various images so that they can look at both of them. And if your organization really pivoted during the pandemic and you did completely different things, like you handed out food or art supplies or other personal protection materials, it's great to show that too. It's really gives a panel a sense of who you are in sort of a greater way, and what types of things you were able to do when you weren't able to do your artwork. And next slide. And just a very few things, I'm going to say mistakes that we'd like you to avoid. And obviously we're going to go into this in more detail with the panelists, but videos with poor sound or visual quality, we're not asking you to do something really expensive and very, that you've had to go out and hire somebody, but we do want to make sure basic things are good. So if you're an organization that does theater or spoken word, you really want to make sure your sound quality is good. If you're a dance company, you want to make sure your visual quality is really good. Think about what you're trying to show us and make sure you're giving us the best quality possible. Like I said, you want to drop us into the action, so please don't start with the credits. Move us to the precise spot where we're going to get sucked in. And remember that I know 5 minutes of video doesn't sound like very much, but if you've ever had to sit down and watch 50 videos for 5 minutes each, I would encourage you to try it one time and see how difficult it is. So you want to keep them engaged in what you're doing. Don't submit work samples that are outdated or old. We're asking for work samples. Certainly they can go back to 2019 because that's pre-pandemic, but we don't want to see something that's from 2016. We really want to see your most current work. And there's the leaf blowers, and sending flyers or posters instead of video or images. People have done this in the past, and I really think it's hurt their applications. I know organizations that do amazing work, and that work wasn't demonstrated by just sending a flyer of a dance company's work. They really want to see either you teaching a class or dancing. Next slide. Don't send a promotional video. Now, this is true for this grant application. It may not be true for other types of applications that you want to do, but we don't really want to see. I've seen ones for a theater company where the artistic director just stood in front of the theater and talked about their work. And that's not what a panel wants to see. They just want to see the work. Anybody can talk about it, but we need to see the artistic quality and the work in action. Don't provide links that don't work or will disappear. And we'll talk more about that later, but remember that the panel is going to be looking at this work into February. So, and it's into late February. So if you're applying, if you're giving us links that may just disappear or drop out or become broken, if they try to open a link and it doesn't work, that's it. We can't expect them to do anything more, so they won't see it. And somebody, and we'll talk about this later today, but one of our guests here today shared an Instagram link with us today. And I just want to be conscious that not everybody has Instagram. So it might require them to sign in to something on their computer. We tried it with a couple of different computers today, and it was a bit of a problem for one of our panelists, our mock panelists. So just be careful about what you're submitting and that somebody can get into it with a click of a button. Don't send us to your website because we're asking panelists not to look at websites. That's not part of the application. Your website is something that you do, you know, that's a way you promote your work, but this is a grant application and we're not going to ask panelists to now go and check out different things on websites. So don't send us a link to that. And obviously, putting too little or too much information, you know, I think basically you want to give people a taste of what you do. We have basic limits on slides. You don't need to give us really long descriptions of things, but we want to make sure that we have a really good taste and a really good flavor for the work you do. So that is, I think that's all I have. The next slide, please. Yeah, now I think I'm happy to finish talking and turn you over to our panelists. And Gioia is going to talk a little bit about the visual arts. And we have some slides that are attached to this presentation, and she can talk about those and give you other pointers. And then Dominick will talk about video. So thank you guys for coming.
Hello. So I just have a few, I pulled images from my own pile of images, and I have the good, the bad, the ugly here. So
and we didn't say which was which, so you can describe. They're just all in
right, right. So it depends. I mean, every grant application is different. I'm not sure exactly what this grant is asking for. So on this slide, I have my image nice and large on a PowerPoint page. Sometimes they're looking for individual images, so you're sending JPEGs and then a list. Other times I can create a PowerPoint and save it as a PDF, and the information is embedded with the image. I prefer that because then you don't have people, you know, the way I see it, if they're if your image is only up on the screen for 10 seconds or less, if they're rifling through the papers to figure out what media it is, that's a few seconds that you lost them. Excuse me. So I like to have the title, the media, and the size right underneath the image if possible. But carefully read the directions on the grant applications. If they have it that they want it a different way, then follow those directions. So this one, I've cropped it down. It's well lit. It's in clear focus. So that's usually what we're looking for. I like a black background because if it's being projected in a dark room, then it's just the work kind of floating on the wall. And I think that it pops the work out a little bit more than a white background. But that's just an aesthetic taste. I know that PowerPoint comes with all these goofy backgrounds. Avoid all of them. Always go for a solid color, either black, white, or gray. You can go to the next slide. So sometimes it will not specify how many images per PowerPoint page. And so this is an example of trying to, like, if I only have 10 images, but I feel like the first image won't explain what I'm looking at, then I try to maybe give a little bit more information. This is a page that probably has too many images, but I didn't want to soak up 3 of my 10 images on one piece. So what I have going on here is on the right is a digital rendering of what I said I was going to do. Excuse me, I should have water nearby. And then on the left is an image of how it actually turned out with tile. And then I have, the straight on flat piece is not really how you experience the work because it's in a hallway. And so I have a hallway shot. Looking at this slide now, I think that I should emphasize the piece as it was finished and de-emphasize the digital sketch. And then have only one hallway shot. I don't need both. So probably the one facing out to the light rather than the one facing out to a bathroom exit or, whatever. It's kind of a dark hallway down there. And then this text is way too small to read. So this is a slide that, I've since corrected those issues on this piece, but that little paragraph there, that blurb is way too small for this slide. Nobody's going to read that. Next image. So this is another example of a project that was hard to explain because there were so many elements to it. It was a social practice piece where I was collecting forks and then creating a sculpture. And I had not built the sculpture yet because I was still collecting the forks, but I was trying to find a location. So I had a picture of a prototype, a digital image of what the piece might look like. Of course, it's made up of all these tiny bits. And so by the time you get far enough away to explain how big it is, you can't see the elements. So this was just a challenging piece to photograph. The image on the right is like the collection jar that I had around town, different places. And so I wanted to include that so people would know what to look for. That image should be better lit. It's not particularly well lit, but it's okay. It tells the story. The brochure is just there to help people understand that there's information that was available, a brochure or whatever. The image on the left, that is my assistant who was helping me fabricate the piece. And I just used him as scale so that people could understand how big each panel was to an average size human. And several of the businesses that I showed this slide to was like, who is that guy? Who is, unkempt person next to the sculpture? And I just took a picture, like, as an emergency, like, hey, stand next to that so I can get a sense of how big it is. But I really should use like a meeple, like a sort of cutout of a human being rather than a specific person, because people get kind of hung up on, his hair or his black socks or whoever he was instead of looking at the piece. So in that slide also has like micro text that no one's ever going to read. So if it's projected, it looks one way, but when it's on a screen, which it probably will be, they cannot read that. So another bad slide.
But I
Next
do want
slide.
to say, I will say that I appreciate the way that you've incorporated the text in with the images so that they've got it all there. And maybe it's too small for this particular case, but
Yeah.
if there was slightly less text, it could still
Right.
work as a good image.
And I will say this was one of those like last minute applications where I was trying to throw something together and I did not have a picture of that sketch with the palm tree and the bus stop in front of it. That small text was kind of attached to the image and I couldn't figure out how to separate them. And so I ended up just using the whole thing and embedding it. And so it was just kind of a, you know, one of the things that you have to figure out if you're going to be an artist applying for grants is how to use your technology. And there's a learning curve on like how to make a PDF so that you can edit things out of it, how to save a photo or how to screen capture it so you can use it somewhere else. And I did not know how to do that at the time of taking this image. And so I was just kind of stuck with what it was. Oh, we learn. Next slide. So this one I think is a little bit more successful. This is another hard to describe project that I was doing for a long time called Pink Week, which was a celebration of the color pink. And I believe for this application, I was applying for a show and I wanted to establish that this was a piece that I had been working on for many years. And so it had its own history attached to it. And so I had a postcard kind of giving a sense of how it's a community event in terms of a bike parade. I had these dancers down below showing that it's, you know, this is how we activate the space. And then the artwork behind it is a gallery show. And then I had kind of a pile of newspaper clippings just again to establish that this is something that communities were getting involved in and that it had, you know, that I was kind of playing with this idea in different cities and what I could do in this town. So I think that this slide is okay. I'm not expecting anyone to read the articles. It's kind of an old school way to do that. I mean, now I don't know if anyone even, you know, clips an article anymore, or if you ever get printed, if somebody does write about you. But at the time, it seemed like a way to kind of establish that if they were to include me in this event, they might get press coverage.
Yeah, and I do think that this is a really successful slide in that it does the one thing that we said is capture somebody's attention, make them see and look and figure out what's going on here. And the addition of the visual and the performance and, you know, pieces together, I think work really well with just a little bit of description so that they know what's going on. But I think it works really well as a slide.
Yeah, I think it's okay. I mean, I know this right in your early part, you said like, don't include flyers, and I have a postcard here, but I think I wanted to just kind of show that this project was lots of things and definitely more than just an art show. Next slide. So sometimes, you know, this was a, again, sometimes they don't want to have the information on the slide. If they tell you to have a slide sheet, have a slide sheet and don't repeat the information in two places. So maybe they just want a blind panel. They just want to look at visually what the artwork looks like without any information and just kind of see how it hits their eyeball. And so there's only a number 1 there so they can refer back to it on the slide. This is a triptych, and so I did include 3 images. I felt like that was okay, even though usually it's 1 image per slide. But I think in the case of a triptych, it's, you know, there's a little bit of wiggle room there. Next slide. Here are 2 other projects. One was a painting project, a mural that was on a dumpster. And that's kind of a hard thing to photograph. So again, I kind of tried to put people in it without any people that were too important or distracting from the scene. So I elected to kind of crop this individual off to the side just to give a sense of scale, and had a few other dumpsters in the background so they didn't think that it was just my one dumpster that I painted. This was a project on the right that was the Capital Box project where they cover electrical boxes, and I elected to not create necessarily a piece of artwork for them to print, but I created kind of an installation in my studio of objects, and then that was photographed and wrapped around the box in the exact scale. And so I was just kind of including 2 slides here so people could understand the process, that the piece that was on the electrical box was an actual installation, a standalone thing that only existed as the box, I guess. So I don't know if that, you know, I guess sometimes my process kind of is very analog, and then I always find a way to translate that into another media, and sometimes that needs a little bit of explaining. Next slide. I don't know how many I gave you. Okay, so this one is a nightmare. This is an augmented reality project that you can only experience through your cell phone. It's otherwise invisible. And so the sketches of it were very raw. And then I worked with a programmer to help this piece exist in the digital realm if you had the app. And so this is a, I want to, oftentimes I'll include this in an application because I want to show that I'm open to working with new media and that I have some experience doing that. But, if they're just looking for still images, this is kind of a tricky one to show. So I took a picture of somebody holding their phone and experiencing the image, and you cannot see the image in the background. And then I cropped in on the screen capture of what they see when they look through the phone. So this one, I'm hoping and praying that when they look at this slide, that they will actually look at the sheet and have some understanding of what augmented reality is. Next slide. I don't know if there's another one. That's it. Yep. Okay, so yeah, I think that the main thing is just, if they have really specific directions, follow them. If they don't have really specific directions, then take some chances to put your work forward. I think the worst thing for two-dimensional artists is just if the work is not clearly focused and well lit. I know that sometimes when I have received a grant, I just build into the grant that I'm going to have professional photography taken, especially with some of these weirder projects. It's really important to get a good picture of it, and I can do that now. Otherwise, if I'm going to have a live event, I make sure that, if you can't have a professional photographer, at least assign 2 friends to take pictures of maybe the audience responding or the actual scene, or crowdsource it. Ask if anyone was there. If you have pictures, you might be able to find some good footage or pictures that way. It's hard in the moment because we work so hard to make the thing or to make the event happen, to remember to follow through and actually document these things. And so if you can always have that at the fore of your mind before you have the show or before you have the event, to make sure that documentation is on your radar, then you'll have a lot more to work with when you're trying to apply for a grant.
And Gioia, when we talked earlier, you talked about not needing to have, professional camera equipment. Can you talk a little bit about that and just being able to use what you have?
Yeah, I think a lot at this point. I mean, your phone probably has a better camera than what I was working with when I started making art. It is important to kind of to make sure things are lit well. And there's strategies you can do to light two-dimensional work so it doesn't have a hot spot or glare. One of the things that's hard to remember at first is to always photograph things before you frame them so that you don't have to deal with the glare of glass. Again, if you have photo editing capabilities, make sure that you learn how to use ways to crop things or adjust color or pull a corner if the image is not absolutely square to your picture plane. So having just some rudimentary photo editing skills really, really, really helps a lot. The standard photo rig is just, if you get 2 clamp lights from Home Depot with some high wattage bulbs and you put them on either side of the piece and cross light it, you're not going to get a hot spot and you can take a better image. I'm also a big fan of standing on a chair or a ladder and taking an image on the floor rather than the wall. So sometimes you have to be a little bit inventive. It's also helpful if you get those lights set up to take a whole bunch at the same time, rather than having to, set it up over and over and over again. Find a day where it's nothing else is happening and focus on that. Yeah, I don't know. I'm open to questions or any other questions, Melissa, you can offer to trigger what we've talked about on another day.
Yeah, definitely. Let's do the video, and then maybe I'll have a couple of questions for both of you.
Okay.
So Dominick, if you want to begin, I know you're having a little, oh, there you are. There you are.
Hi, good evening, everybody. Thank you for having me. Melissa, thank you for calling me for this duty and sharing my expertise and wisdom with filmmaking. I did have a question, Melissa, about how much narration can be included with this specific
Yeah, we did
video.
talk about that because I think it depends on the type of organization that's doing a video. So specifically for this grant, if it's for performance, for example, if it's like a theater company or a dance company that's showing their work, we would probably ask for minimal narration. Doesn't mean that we can't have it, but it becomes distracting if it's a, like I said, a presenter standing there talking about the artwork and then moving on to other short little clips. You find that panels for these types of grant applications would rather have you like get into the action immediately. There are other types of organizations though, so that's like one example. But for example, if you were a service organization or you did work that you wanted to demonstrate through video, but you didn't have the same, performance aspect of it, then I would say that that's an opportunity for maybe some narration that could really help explain what your services are. So if that helps.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. And Gioia, thank you for all this helpful advice and hints for taking on such a project that if you've never done before, it's not an incredible challenge. It can be an actually a very productive and insightful challenge as well, because what can happen is it can lead to discoveries and possibly, forming, teams and collaborate in ways that you never have collaborated before. So this is a good chance for your organization to take on this task if you've never done it before. I did have a, I guess I can share it. It's a script. I'm just going to go ahead and place it up on the screen here. Let's see. So just kind of go what makes a good video. My name is Dominick Porras. I'm a media journalist, a digital artist for the past 15 years. I'm also one of the co-founders of Soul Collective, where I also co-developed Soul Life Media and also worked as a creative producer for On Native Ground, an indigenous media agency. I've had the opportunity to work with the city of Sacramento over the past few years, assisting in documenting and creating content for city-sponsored events and artist profiles. In my experience being a media journalist, content creator, I have been able to expand my palette and what defines and makes a good video. So video production can be a one-person driven machine, but there is also room for innovation. So what I can immediately share is a video recipe designed for individuals interested in applying practical filmmaking skills to creative media projects to enhance presentations and online presence. So this is kind of like a basic recipe to help you guide yourself through a video project. So that's why I kind of asked about how much narration is allowed. But I guess it could also be scripted into the video production, such as using slides. So if you're going to be presenting works of art, like Gioia said, there should be a slide that can be defining as much as information about the project to allow for that that detail to be presented in a piece. So like if you're creating something that is unique, such as like from a imported material, you want to address that in that slide. If you're using materials that are sacred or materials that are were lent to you, then you want to address that as well. So visuals, media, as the evidence, the product, whatever you can acquire, you know, that can be your, you know, the photographs of, you know, through your iPhone. That's one of the easiest way to collect media for this project. Or if you have a DSLR camera, that's probably the I would suggest using a camera like a DSLR to capture your evidence, because it is higher resolution than an iPhone, and it allows you to use the photo by increasing, you know, certain parts of the photo so that you can show detail within your product there. And I guess for audio, like, I guess if you are a organization that will need to use audio, sometimes ambience noise can really either add texture, or it can be a distraction. So that's one thing you want to be careful of, is like how much of the experience that you want the listener to listen to. So be careful with the ambience noise, but yeah, audio is pretty important. So I think this, Melissa, are you going to be able to share this this document?
Yep, absolutely. We can put that up on our website so that people can have the reminder. All of the video from this, we're recording this, and it'll go onto the website, and any additional documentation that people want to share, because I know you have some resources there too, that there might be some links people might want to look at.
Yes. So I'll go ahead and just kind of carry on through this the script here. So yeah, photos and images, they can be applied to storytelling projects just as film does. So preparing your visuals, such as artworks and photographs, can be a challenge. DSLR cameras offer higher resolution, just like I suggested. Smart devices have the capability of magnifying, but don't quite hold the resolution that the DSLR does. In addition, tripods and camera timers are extremely helpful in capturing stills. Wide lenses can often distort your work, so try zooming in to avoid camera curvature, especially when you're documenting wide pieces or pieces that are vertical. They can cause certain, you know, distortion to the appearance of the image. So either take a few steps back to either zoom in so that you have a square looking format rather than a bulgy format. So if you're using documented and interview footage, it can often be timely tasks to sift through. Video editing programs feature functions that allow for viewing footage at a faster rate than normal pace. So mastering this technique will help you increase your efficiency in editing. So look for that if you have that capabilities. If you don't have that capability, then just use what you know, stills if you can. Gioia mentioned screenshots, and I want to talk about screenshots. That is a great way to, if you don't have access to media immediately, screenshots are very effective to include into your project as well. They, I think most programs on PCs and Macs, if you use the screenshots, you're able to crop, you know, unnecessary parts of the screenshot. So make sure that you are cropping out, you know, unnecessary parts of the screenshot. Let's see. I think I mentioned audio and ambience noise. So audio is equally important as your visual production. So when you're producing interviews in ambience noise, by collecting ambience noise, this adds a unique sound to your unique sound texture to your project that can be utilized for stylizing sound. I think I have some more. Yeah. Excuse me. Gathering interviews may be a challenge when surrounded by loud ambient noise. So try to isolate yourself from the crowd to obtain a great level of audio with your camera mic. If unable to isolate background noise, place your camera's mic closer to the subject's mouth to obtain a voiceover. An iPhone is ideal in the situation where the iPhone can become the audio recording device. And if you have a lavalier or a microphone, that's a great investment to add if you can include that in your project. Duration and timing. Social media and streaming platforms offer various durations for content. Posts and stories and reels offer unique advantages for visibility on social media, while streaming platforms offer incentives for selecting their services. I'm not sure how much, I think Melissa, you mentioned that it wouldn't be the ideal situation to send a post. However, if that post is something you can include, I think there is a function, I believe there's a function to download onto your smart device to use those portions or to use to use that content as portions into your project. So that's,
Yeah, you just want to be really careful about it so that it's not driving you to the site, so not driving you to Facebook or driving you to Instagram, because again, it's based on whether people have an account. And also remember that sometimes panelists are using, work generated computers. So if you're using a government computer, there's going to be certain things that you're going to have some issues with. So that's why links to YouTube videos are always really good. And if there is a workaround, as Dominick said, around like an Instagram post or something like that, think about it.
thank you, Melissa. Gioia mentioned lighting is crucial, and I'll go over some of my little experience with that. So window light, is a costly way to convey that naturally lit scene, especially if you're using like a live subject that'll bring maximum comfort. Reflectors are an expensive way to increase lighting with your setting. If you're able to purchase reflectors, not like bike reflectors, but they're like these, they're usually white. You can actually use a giant white post board, or I've even used giant white Post-its. Those are very handy because they can also help diffuse lighting if it's too bright. So that's another way to work with lighting. Another thing is LED versus like halogen lights. Standard LEDs tend to give off cold tones, so that usually emits like a cooler light rays, and sometimes it might make your photos look cooler than usual, and it gives it like a blue tone. And then halogen lights often give it a warmer tone, so it might give a yellow tone. So if you're using a DSLR camera, make sure that you are adjusting your white balance setting on there. So that's a very helpful function to help you capturing true color for your projects or your products. Or if you're going to be videotaping, I think that's it works for the same function as well. So I have some samples here, but they're fairly long. Again, iPhone technology has everything from recording video, audio, including editing, I would, if that is what you are limited to, then that's a good investment. But if you can invest in video and audio editing hardware, like tripods, reflectors, lighting, and stands, then they can increase the value in the production. And so I think I had yeah, if you happen to Google what makes a good video content, and they give you this thing here, but I'm not sure how much of it applies to what we are looking at here. So I think that's kind of it for my presentation. If you have any questions.
That's great. There's some questions in the chat, so I'm gonna, if everybody's okay, I'm gonna jump in and see if we can get, because I want to be mindful of everybody's time, but let's maybe try to get to some questions. And then after, we can open it up more widely to other questions if people want to unmute and just throw their questions out. So somebody said, Gioia, your advice seemed to be for individual artists, but this is a grant for nonprofits. So how does your advice relate to what organizations will submit? It doesn't seem like organizations will be submitting images of individual artworks. I would push back on that a little bit and say, if you're an organization that is specifically shows work by artists, I would say include some of those images. If you're a exhibiting gallery or museum, I would say show those images. Again, not only, that's why I like that image you showed, Gioia, earlier, that had a piece of art, and I realized it was a digital representation of a space, but it was actually nice to see the space. Just as kind of a preface to everybody, I just want you to know that the panelists for this grant application, the majority of them will not be from Sacramento. They will not be from the Sacramento region. We did that really consciously to make sure that there wasn't conflict of interest. So please know that they will not know your work ahead of time. So you're coming in, they're coming to your work blind. So always think about the audience who doesn't know you and know your work. And you could be talking about your space, and everybody here in this room knows about your space, but those panelists don't. So keep aware of that. How many slides can we submit? I think for images, they're up to 10. But as you see, the way that they were presented here, there are lots of different ways you can present a slide or an image. So you can be creative with that. We're not going to be maybe as rigid as some other, juried exhibitions would be.
I think, can I chime in on the organization? I've run several projects that are more collaborative, or I ran a gallery for a while, or even in my role as a, part of an art department. I think that your images, if you can give context to like what you're trying to do and who you're serving, that can be useful. I think I focused on just like the quality of the images and the information on the page, because as a panelist, not that I'm a panelist for this one, but when I have reviewed other types of applications, the quality of the slide is a real problem. Like, we can't get to the work if the slide is poor quality, or if the information with the slide is too dense or not enough. So I think that's why I went that way. But it just depends on like what type of, like what you think your strengths are or what you think your needs are. So I think sometimes it could help to take a picture of the exterior of your building, or give some kind of context to your neighborhood. If you're really a community-based organization, that can help us understand where you're at and what the foot traffic is like, or the lack of foot traffic. I think that seeing the space, that gives me an idea of like, if the space is very raw, then we're dealing with like, it's a very hands-on sort of, labor of love sort of effort, versus if it's a very polished space. And I wouldn't be embarrassed about the space at all. I think I would just lead with it. Like, this is what I've got to work with, and this is what I'm trying to make happen. I think it helps, like, to see a blank room can feel a little bit like something out of Zillow or real estate. So it helps to just understand like how much space you're working with, but I really like to see people in the space. What is the vibe at an event? You can tell with the body language. Are people having a good time? Are they talking to each other, or are they all kind of standing there with their arms straight on their sides with kind of confused looks on their faces? So if you can find, shots where people are leaning in and they're smiling and they're having a good time, or they feel engaged with whatever activity you're offering them. So I've done like maybe close-ups. I have one picture for Give a Fork where there's a close-up of a kid coloring one of the coloring book images. And then you can see there's people in the back admiring the sculpture. So I'm trying to tell a story of like what one of my events feels like. So I don't know if that helps, but you can get creative with it, is I guess what I'm saying. And just think about like when you close your eyes and you're thinking about your organization and when it's really functioning at its best, what does that look like and how can you get a picture of it?
Thanks. That's great. Liv asked, does a 5-minute video count as one slide? Now, Liv, you'll see on the actual application, there is a spot to upload video, which is distinct from the spot where you'll upload slides. So you can do both. You have an opportunity to do one of each if you want. So you don't have to. We ask for a media sample and people can be creative with how they want to do this. And we also got a question of, we've produced publications over the past few years, but it doesn't seem like physical media is allowed. When we did the last time we did this application, we actually collected 8 copies of physical things. So the panel sat there with a huge stack of items, whether they were CDs, books, you name it. I mean, this is how we've changed since 2018. Everything has to be submitted electronically. So you could have a slide that maybe would contain, the cover of a publication and maybe open to a certain page. So you'd have to photograph it in that case. And I would recommend that for a literary organization that produces books. That's a good way to demonstrate it. Or even a slide if you produce multiple books, maybe a slide that contains multiple books. No, does anybody want to ask a question? Do you just want to unmute and ask a question? And I also, if I can figure out how to do it and share my screen, Shira Lane from the Atrium provided a couple of work samples, and I thought it was interesting to kind of look at them and get people's perspective. So let's see if I can do this. Whoops. Might be able to. I'm going to have to go to my, let's see. Oh. See my desktop, and let's get that out of the way. And I am going to show 2 videos. Everybody see and hear that? All right, I'm going to show you another one. Let's see. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing. Anybody going to give me their thoughts on what was more effective? If you're going to submit one of those as a media sample. Panelists, anybody?
Well, my reception was a little funny, but the first one, was it Pop-Up Eco? Was that what it's called?
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was visually appealing, but too fast. It's there's a certain style of editing for social media where there is like a demand to show like as much as you can within that amount of time. So if it were for something like use as a introduction into something, since it's so quick, then those pieces can be extended out. Like you could take all of those clips that were used in that project, it can be extended out a little bit longer. So I think it's a for the platform, it's great, but for what we see, for what is demanded for this grant, if it was just extended maybe just twice as long, then I think it would be something acceptable.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I should have
think-
made sure I had the audio turned on and I didn't, so you just got to see the visuals, but there was music that went along with the audio for the first one that I showed.
I think
What?
it could be a good opportunity to use some of that same footage, but then have a voiceover telling about your organization. So like Melissa talked about, the problem of having, say the executive of the organization talking on a blank stage, and that doesn't really show what's happening there, even though that person might be, very articulate and a good public speaker. It's just it's a lost opportunity. But I think if you're showing images and then you have some voiceover explaining what we're looking at, in that case, I would say that, what the video was trying to show is that the atrium does a variety of things, and everything from supporting crafters to having classes to having, social events. Then I think that, yes, people could get it together, but without the narrative, it might be like, what is this? Is this an overview of all the arts going on in Sacramento, or is this all happening in one space? And so with a voiceover, you can kind of explain what we're seeing, and that it is indeed all stuff that happens in that one space.
Yeah, that's great. Those are both great comments about that. And I guess what I would say is, because Shira just sent me a couple of them, and the one was very product oriented, which if you know the atrium and you know that the artists there are creating things to sell, it makes sense. But if you don't know it, you're looking at a series of products, where in the other case, you're looking at people doing stuff. And I agree that the fast cuts without much explanation could be a little bit confusing, or just might seem to be more jarring. But at least if I had to pick between the two of those, that was the one that gave you a sense of a lot of stuff is going on at the atrium, and they're doing lots of things to activate that space. But again, as Gioia said, without some kind of an introduction, is it something that a panel is going to make sense of or have questions about? So it's just something to think about. But thank you for offering that.
Can I add something too? Like, panelists, I mean, they will read, and they have to read as part of their thing, but nobody wants to read. So if you can make sure that if you have an opportunity to tell in your video, then take that opportunity. I'd also say, if you've already written it out, then maybe don't re-say it, say something else, because they're going to read that first blurb, and it's a real bummer. Then you load up the video and you watch 5 minutes of video that just repeats what you already read. So it's an opportunity to like pad your application, to say something new, to extrapolate something that you mentioned earlier.
Right. That's really good. I think I've covered all the questions that are in the Q&A, but if anybody just wants to kind of ask a live question, either to the panelist or to me about media samples, happy to take questions now. And I think you just have to unmute yourself and throw it out there.
Did we get through? There's one, David Fox is, we are a theater company.
Oh, did I miss that one? Oops.
It says, we are a theater company that doesn't film our shows. We take photos for archival purposes, but we don't have video of our performances. What do you suggest we submit?
Yeah, go ahead.
So, yeah, that's, photos and are, just as valid as video. And I think with the company that you work with, you can use a narration to go along to detail shows and important information that is
Mm.
that you want to highlight. So you can make a video out of photos. That is totally possible. Depending on what, technology that you have access to, whether it's a smartphone or a laptop or a desktop. Yeah, you can
Yeah.
either reach out to one of us for some more advice on that.
That is
Or
great
also-
advice. I mean, obviously, if you could do video, it's gonna be, I have to say, you can't go back and do something that you haven't done, but if you only have photos, think about a way to make those photos, as Dominic said, come alive. Video is always going to show a theater company in a stronger light than just a photo is, particularly when the panel's trying to assess the art. Like how strong is this?
how about audience afterwards? If you had a videographer in the lobby and you asked them, can you tell us about your experience here tonight? I mean, I think a testimonial from your patrons would probably go a long way. I respect that you wouldn't want to photograph that performance, but if you get people's reactions, that could be really powerful.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I realize that you do have to raise your hand, and then we can unmute you to speak. So Justina, I saw you first, so.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. So I'm at Verge, and we have artists who participate in lots of our programs, including our residency program. We have about 55 artists, and then we have artists in all our exhibits. So what I'm worried would be confusing is if we show images that kind of show our space and our events and our exhibits with people in the space, and maybe a picture of the building to give the panelists an idea of where we're located. If we were to also show artwork images from the artists in our space, in my opinion, I feel like that might be confusing, because then they see this stuff happening at Verge, but then there's just these artwork images. What would you suggest in that situation?
I'm going to throw out that, again, it's totally up to you. You have 10 images, so you can decide how to use them. But if you had an exhibition that you feel like represented you in a way that was strong and was unique, and there's maybe an image or that was particularly representative of what you were trying to accomplish, I would be all for including it. I don't see any problem in including that. And again, to me, that strengthens the application when I can see what you're producing. If I'm only looking at walls and spaces and people, I might feel like I'm just missing something where I need to see a piece of artwork. But that's, that's a judgment call for you. I mean, I would encourage it, but it's up to you.
Because it's not technically, so Gioia is a resident at Verge, and if I were to show an image of Gioia's artwork, that doesn't necessarily, I guess it kind of represents Verge, but it mostly represents Gioia. It's not something that Verge created.
I mean, I think maybe the distinction is getting around, like maybe you show the photograph on the wall, or I mean, you show the image on the wall, as opposed to just an image in space where it has no context.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I mean, for something that's complex, sorry. I was just gonna say, for something that's complex, like the Atrium or Verge, where it's multifaceted, or even Soul Collective, I think like maybe just a quick video tour of the building, of like how extensive this thing is, or labyrinthine. I mean, if you went down a hallway and you just showed like passing a studio, passing a studio, passing a studio, now we're in a gallery, now we're in a classroom, it would kind of give people an idea of what's happening there. I mean, it's harder to edit something like that together, but I think that there's a way that you can explain in a quickly what's happening.
Okay, thank you. And then my other question is related to the video sample. There's just one video that we can upload, right?
Yes.
It has to be all one.
Yep.
Because I'm worried, well, for Verge and for other organizations, we only have about a little over a week now. It seems like a lot of organizations aren't going to have that like video expertise that they can just start now and put together a video, like a tour of their building, or like,
Mm.
because for us, we have like multiple different videos that we could use. Like we have a documentary series, we have videos from our lectures, we have artist interviews, but we don't have like someone on staff who does video editing. And I feel like we're not going to be the only organization that has this issue. What would you recommend for, telling the whole story through one video if they don't have someone to edit all their videos together?
Well, I'm going to start off right off the bat by saying the expectation is not that you have hired a video editor. Our panelists might have some good ideas, but really this is a work sample. It's really just to show who you are and make it come to life. So you have what you have. I mean, I think we have so many different types of organizations and so many different levels of, technical expertise or staffing or, time in the day. So it's about something that's going to enhance your application, and it's not about stressing out over it, and it's not about spending a lot of money. It's about using what you have. What have you had to use for other things? You've all had to, use images for marketing purposes and website purposes. So it's not like I don't believe everybody has something. We just don't expect it to be the be all and end all of video production or, whatever, portfolio creation. So we just really want you to, work with what you have. We know the timeline is, it's short. It's probably longer than most grant application timelines you will have, but that again is not based on your going out there and doing new video. It's just showing us what you have.
Okay, it sounded like what Dominick was saying was about creating a new video, but thank you, that's helpful.
Yeah, and I mean, as I preface this whole conversation, these are just ideas for you to use for a number of different purposes. I mean, the focus here is on this grant application, but there's also this opportunity to look at your work in the future and say, if we had this to do over again, would we have taken not even an investment in money, but would we have invested in a little more time in us documenting the work? I guess so. Maybe I'd like to just think about it in terms of documentation. And I also want to get to a couple of other questions here. So I'm going to just jump to some other questions because we're kind of running out of time. And Shira, you're up next.
Thank you. One question I had, you said, where would you like us to host this video? I know you mentioned YouTube, but do you want us to create a landing page so that way we can host the video on this landing page? Is that kind of cheating? Because, we can, spruce up that landing page. I just want to know what's the best way, because I understood Instagram makes sense if you don't have an account, you're on a government account.
No, totally up to you, whether you want to include, whether you want to upload a video, which you absolutely can do, you can upload it, or you could create a landing page, and that's totally up to you, as long as it's, all we care about is if it's a link that it works, and if you've uploaded it, that, you've tested it. Go in there and click on it and make sure that it works. We'll also be reviewing all these applications the week before the panel sees them. So we'll go and test everything out. And if it's not working, you'll have a few days to try to fix it.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Hopefully that helps. Kathleen? You can unmute you. Oops. Kathleen, do you have a question? You can unmute yourself.
Sorry, I muted because my dog was whining. All right, 90% of our programming occurs within Sacramento. However, we have one program that's also a national touring company, and the best video that I have for 2021 occurred outside of Sacramento County because they couldn't get the lights on for our performance. Would it be permissible to use that as the example of what that group does?
Is it the same group would they be seeing the same thing that they would be seeing in Sacramento?
Yes.
Yeah, that's fine. Just be clear about where it is. That's fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's where they ended up. It was our last performance.
Yeah,
So
that's totally fine, as long as it's the same kind of group of people and they'd be seeing.
it's
same
the
thing.
exact same performers.
Absolutely fine.
All right, thank you.
Sure. Sure. Any last thoughts from the panelists? If nobody else has any questions? Anything that you all want to add?
Yeah, I just want to add just real quick. There are, if you can't access video editing applications, I believe PowerPoint, I've worked in PowerPoint as an instructional designer, and it has a capability of putting together video video presentations. So you can use PowerPoint if that is all you have, and it does the job. You can even incorporate audio. I think you can just press the button on this. You can use audio while it's running. So if you haven't explored that option, that's another option.
I have another idea. First of all, yes, thank you for having me here, and I hope good luck to everyone. Also, just because the last 2 years I've been teaching online, I've been doing a lot of video editing, suddenly having to do that. And you can do a Zoom with yourself and share your screen and show images and kind of walk people through some ideas you have about your space. It's sort of like you're giving a slide lecture, and just make it personable and don't make it feel like a college class. But I think there's a way. And also iMovie, it's if you have a Mac, it's there, and it's actually not too hard. Don't be intimidated by it. And there's a couple of YouTube videos that can help you. You can do it. You can do it.
I totally agree. I mean, really, I've sat on so many panels before, and it's about capturing somebody, capturing the heart of what you do. And those are just like a few moments, a few seconds, a few minutes that really is what it's going to make a difference to a panel. Again, when they're looking a lot of applications, so doesn't necessarily need to be slick. I've seen organizations score really high with very kind of homemade type presentations that they figured out how to do themselves, and it's worked fine. So, but it was a pleasure to have two experts come in and talk. And I'm going to invite you to come back and do this again, because we're going to have more opportunities for individual artists when we can really be specific about, showing your work samples as an artist, applying for a grant application rather than an organization. So I think you'll have specifics then. And again, if there are questions, feel free to email us at any time if you're still struggling with it. And again, we're going to have time to, check out your work samples to make sure they all work. So thanks, everybody. Thanks, Dominic. Thanks, Gioia and Diana, of course, for running this whole thing, and see y'all soon. Bye.
Bye.